Once upon a forgotten time, Dana White told us all that females would never compete inside the UFC octagon. This question was posed to Dana White by a TMZ reporter at a time when women's MMA was kind of there, but not really.
When are we gonna see women in the UFC, man?
Never.
Never?
When are we gonna see women in the UFC? The UFC boss was aware of that. The lack of a popular name, coupled with the mediocre roster, held it back, and women's MMA existed, but with very little relevance to the overall sport. 2 years later, though, Dana White himself was promoting the inaugural class at UFC 157, pitting Ronda Rousey against Liz Carmouche. The Ronda Rousey show was such a smash hit that Joe Rogan declared Ronda Rousey once ever athletes.
Once in a lifetime, she's once ever!
Even shed a few tears in the face of greatness. Such was the impact of.
It was so emotional for me. That was the closest I've ever come to crying while I might cry now, when I was interviewing somebody. It's because it was so intense, and it was also like, I really knew that I was like seeing history.
We are almost a decade beyond that time, and yet, it feels like we're back in 2011. Lack of a popular name and a stagnant, mediocre roster. Somewhere along the way, something went wrong, and I'm out to figure out what happened.
Logical reasons why you would say that at the time.
When are we gonna see women in the UFC, man?
Never.
Anytime soon? Never?
I was trying to get people to accept the men fighting in a cage. And I'm gonna admit, you know, there's this male chauvinist side to all of us. I don't wanna see a pretty girl getting elbowed in the face. Who wants to see that? I wanna see that. Then I met Ronda Rousey.
From 2012 to 2015, Ronda Rousey was special beyond special. Jon Jones and his dominance, Brock Lesnar and his box office appeal. Rousey had both, and somehow she did it even better. The very first women's MMA fight under the UFC banner ended in the first round. And that was a perfect start to the experiment, and it grew into a profitable venture, all on the back of the untouchable champion. Her next title defense was even bigger against her rival and an established name, and Miesha Tate. She won that as well and kept at it.
Ronda Rousey!
Single opponent made it past the first round. By fall of 2015, Ronda Rousey was not just a fighter, she was the sport itself. It was not women's MMA, it was the Ronda Rousey show. And between the spectacle hype and the sheer dominance, we never really got a chance to sit down and think. What about the ones she beat? The corporate folks from Dana White to Joe Rogan had already declared her the greatest ever, and her hypothetical feats grew more absurd with every octagon victory from 50% of the male bantamweights.
I was like, she could probably beat half the men bantamweights in the UFC.
Is that true?
The Floyd Mayweather.
If Ronda Rousey fought Floyd Mayweather with their two disciplines, who would win?
I know people get crazy about this, but the people that don't know what they don't know, she would ragdoll him as soon as she put her hands on him.
Cain Velasquez himself, Rousey was capable of beating them all under the right circumstances. Once again, we didn't stop to think. Unfortunately, the Rowdy show came to a brutal end at UFC 193 when Holly Holm, a former pro boxer, knocked her unconscious in the second round, and the unraveling began. The mystique of the appeal of Ronda Rousey came crashing down. And so did the sport of women's MMA.
Honestly, like, I thought I was like in the medical room, and I was like down in the corner. I was sitting in the corner, and I was like, what am I anymore if I'm not this?
The show over and Rousey gone, we finally started questioning.
I think women's MMA is sort of at a level where men's MMA was in like the late 90s, like maybe the early 2000s, you know? It's like the level of competition is just not nowhere near where it is in the men's division. And
in the aftermath, Amanda Nunes emerged as the consensus greatest female fighter of all time, and she reigns undisputed to this day. She surpassed Ronda herself in a few short years and left no doubt, but maybe somewhere along the way, the UFC tapped out and stopped putting the effort they did during the Rousey era of the hype machine, working overtime and transforming every event into a unique spectacle, and started paying attention to the actual work inside the octagon, and it was not a pretty sight for the most part. For every Amanda Nunes and Wally John, There are about 10 or 20 who simply do not belong on the main card, have a pay-per-view, and the frustration melt each time a fight fails to deliver. This happens across the board from contender fighters, the championship belts down.
That takedown. And an interesting response from both athletes.
I'm proud of myself because I stuck to my strategy. Like I said, I'm an exciting fighter. I'm a finisher. I've got one of the highest finishing rates, so I don't think that I was getting the boos. I'm pretty sure that was.
Apart from a handful of legitimately great fighters, the roster is shallow, and the skill levels fall off a cliff after the champion and a few contenders. But all of this has been reiterated time and time again. Each time a fight cripples the momentum of the main card. We all gather around to rave and rant about the lack of skill and talent. But there are other factors at play here. We never discuss those. Most fans just do not care anymore, and consequently, neither does the company. During the peak of the Rousey era, fans hardcore and casuals alike followed women's MMA, but following her departure, interest plummeted. There is a general sense of apathy among the UFC fan base towards women's mixed martial arts, and in turn, the UFC is content with women's MMA just existing within the company in the good old days. Dana White and Joe Rogan, the alpha males of the UFC, were the ones spearheading women's MMA, and Rousey was everywhere on talk shows, magazine covers, and commercials because fans wanted her there. Now, crickets, hardcore fans do not follow because the talent pool is shallow and casual fans do not have a cultural icon that draws them in. Today, the entire sport of women's mixed martial arts largely revolves around one individual. Back then, it was Ronda Rousey, and today it's Amanda Nunes. And sure, during her fight week, the UFC always uploads a 2-minute promo package declaring her as the best ever, but that is the definition of going through the motions. And most fans have no interest in watching any more than that. The promotional push around Nunes and the entire sport is non-existent in comparison to before, and when you put all these together, lack of talent, her red matchmaking, and general apathy from the fan base, it really feels like 2011 up in here. Women's MMA collapsed the moment Rousey was knocked unconscious. The evolution stopped right there, and then fans hopped off. Dana White moved on, and stagnancy followed. The in-cage limitations were even worse during the reign of Rousey, but it was novel. It was chaotic, and the company itself was behind it. So a lot of the deficiencies were camouflaged, and we just enjoyed the ones ever show. But without the spectacle, a million hype packages and Rogans screaming about generational shifts, it becomes painfully apparent women's MMA is still in its early years, and fan support reflects that. From 1992 to 2005, MMA struggled for relevancy, but with the first breakthrough, the sport evolved in a burst. We had GSP Anderson Silva, Brock Lesnar, and Conor McGregor, while on the other side, there was only Ronda Rousey. Amanda Nunes is great, but to build upon a sport, you need megastars that carry the torch. Maybe in due time, another superstar will emerge, bringing in fans and inspiring future competitors. Better athletes to become mixed martial artists, but the company complacent and the talent pool stuck. It will take quite a while. In the meantime, though, who's ready for the blockbuster Nunes versus Aldana fight? Show of hands, see what I mean? Anyways, I gotta bounce. Catch on the next one. Peace out.